3 weeks ago, my world fell apart. I woke up on an ordinary morning, not knowing that this day would mark the end of everything I thought was true. My husband, the person I had shared my life, dreams, and even my fears with, simply left the house without a second glance, without a goodbye kiss, without a word of explanation. I stood there, my heart racing, feeling that something was wrong, but not knowing what. The hours passed, and with each unanswered message, my fear turned into something darker. Was this the end? I couldn't believe it. The pain of seeing my phone silent was more cruel than any farewell. I spent sleepless nights, questioning what I could have done wrong. Had he left me for someone else? Or perhaps he was going through something I couldn't understand. But none of these answers made sense. I didn't know, and maybe I never would. What I did know was that something in our relationship had broken. His absence was stronger than any physical presence. And then one night, after days and days of uncertainty, he came back. And with him, a proposal I never imagined. When he showed up at my door, he was no longer the man I loved. He was different. He brought with him a cold, insensitive request that would turn everything upside down. He wanted an open relationship. No, it wasn't a plea for a second chance. He wanted me to accept sharing him with another woman, his mistress. I froze. I couldn't understand anything at that moment. The pain I felt was overtaken by a whirlwind of emotions. How could someone I loved so much do this to me? How could he come back after abandoning me without explanation and make such an insane request? My mind couldn't process it. But what I did know was that this proposal wasn't just about him. It was about me, about what I would or would not accept in my life. And from that moment on, my journey to understand what was happening inside me began. If you've ever gone through something like this, or if you're just curious to see where the story goes, stay with me. What comes next will touch you in ways you might not expect. Don't forget to like and subscribe because you won't want to miss the rest of the story. When he left me, it was as if a part of me had been ripped out mercilessly. There were no screams, no arguments, just silence. He left through the door, grabbed his things, and was gone, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And I was left there, alone in the middle of that house that no longer seemed like mine. His scent was still in the air, traces of his presence in every corner. But he wasn't there anymore. I didn't know what to do. With each passing second, the emptiness spread, taking over me until my mind was filled with questions that seemed endless. Where did he go? What happened? What did I do wrong? Does he still love me? Or was it all over a long time ago, and I didn't see it? I spent the first few days in a whirlwind. It was like I was living in slow motion, watching things happen around me, but unable to touch them. The emptiness was so deep that, even surrounded by people, I felt completely alone. And when the phone rang, my heart raced, hoping it was him. But it wasn't. It wasn't. It was just messages from friends, from family, all asking what had happened, trying to comfort me, but none of that made sense to me. Nothing could ease the pain I felt. The days passed, but his silence was what hurt me the most. There was no explanation, no apology, nothing. He simply left, and I was left with the remnants of a love that seemed to have evaporated before my eyes. I remember one night in particular. I was alone in the living room, staring at the television, but not really seeing anything. I wasn't interested in distractions anymore. I wanted answers. What was he doing? Was he with another woman? With each day that passed, the pain of not knowing turned into an obsession. I found myself searching through social media for any clue, any hint of where he was, of what he was doing. But deep down, I knew his absence was an answer in itself. And then, when I was starting to accept that he wouldn't return, he came back. It wasn't an emotional return. There wasn't a warm apology. None of that. He simply showed up at my door with a blank face, without a clear explanation. I didn't know what to expect. What would he have to say after days of silence and distance? I didn't know if I was prepared to hear it, but at the same time, I was desperate for a word, for any sign that he still cared, that he was still thinking of me. But what he brought was something I never imagined. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a gesture of regret. He brought a proposal. A proposal I wasn't prepared to hear. He wanted to open up our relationship. He wanted me to accept sharing our life with another person, with the woman he was seeing. I froze. I couldn't understand anything at that moment. The pain I felt was overtaken by a whirlwind of emotions. How could someone I loved so much do this to me? How could he come back after abandoning me without explanation and make such an insane request? My mind couldn't process it. But what I did know was that this proposal wasn't just about him. It was about me, about what I would or would not accept in my life. And from that moment on, my journey to understand what was happening inside me began. If you've ever gone through something like this, or if you're just curious to see where the story goes, stay with me. What comes next will touch you in ways you might not expect. Don't forget to like and subscribe because you won't want to miss the rest of this story. The solitude that followed that request felt like a weight piling on top of me, a burden too difficult to carry. I didn't know if I was more lost in his absence or in the feeling that everything I knew was falling apart. Each morning I woke up, the emptiness felt more real, more tangible. The house seemed too big without him, and the silence that used to be comforting was now deafening. The walls, which had once witnessed our laughter and plans for the future, now seemed to stare at me with a silent judgment. I began to question myself constantly. What happened to the woman he fell in love with? What happened to our relationship? Had he really changed this much, or was I the one who didn't notice that he was already distancing himself? During those days, the questions kept piling up, each answer leading me deeper into uncertainty. I found myself questioning everything he had said during our marriage, every promise, every look, every gesture that seemed so genuine at first. How could I have been so blind? How could I have believed that we were fine when the truth was right in front of me, but I couldn't see it? I felt as if I had been deceived, and the worst part was that I didn't even know how to start over. The pain was like a constant weight on my shoulders, and the more I tried to ignore it, the deeper it sank me. The memories of what we had, of who we were together, became a torture. I remember all the nights I stayed awake, replaying everything that had happened in my mind. I saw him smiling, with that look full of love and promises, and now he was asking me to share his life with another person. How was that possible? How could the man I dreamed of building a future with now be trying to divide me in such a cruel way? My heart was shattered, and the worst part was the doubt that consumed me. I didn't know how to feel anymore.
How could he do this to me?
How could someone ask you to share your love with another person, as if it were something normal? I found myself in an internal conflict. That man was the person I loved, but he was no longer the same. He had transformed into someone I didn't recognize, someone I feared. The person he had become didn't fit into the life I imagined for us. But at the same time, something inside me still clung to him. I still wanted to believe that he was the man who made me smile, who made me feel loved. I didn't want to lose everything we had, but the pain of being treated as a piece of something to be shared with another woman was unbearable. And there I was in an emotional limbo. I didn't want to be weak. I didn't want to be the woman who would succumb to the pain without fighting, but at the same time, I didn't know if I was ready to face this new reality. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to move on, but each time I thought of him, each memory that resurfaced, I felt more fragile. I felt lost, as if I were floating in a sea of uncertainty and couldn't find the shore. I kept wondering what to do with this pain. I didn't know how to deal with the emptiness, how to deal with his absence. Sometimes, I caught myself imagining what my life would be like without him, but at the same time, the idea of losing everything we had seemed unbearable. I found myself at a breaking point. I didn't know which path to take. I didn't know if there was still anything worth fighting for. The hardest part was the lack of answers. He had gone and left me with a huge hole in my chest, a hole full of doubts and anguish. And the truth was that, even with all the advice from friends, from my family, I knew that no one could give me an answer. This decision was mine, and no matter how much I tried to avoid it, it was there, watching me, daring me to face what was to come. There was no going back. And if you are going through something, when he returned, the feeling I had was like living in a nightmare. He appeared at my door with that cold look, as if nothing had happened. I looked at him, trying to find some sign, some gesture that told me he still cared, that there was some trace of the man I loved still there. But there wasn't. He was distant, different. Something had changed in his gaze. Maybe it was the weight of what he was about to tell me, or maybe it was guilt, but the fact was I no longer recognized him. At first, I didn't know what to say. The words were stuck in my throat, and I could only stare at his expression, trying to understand what he was doing there. His absence had made me stronger, more distant, more closed off. I wasn't the same person I was before. What he had done to me, what he had made me feel, transformed me in ways I still couldn't comprehend. He looked at me as if waiting for a reaction, but I didn't know how to react. At that moment, he was a stranger who came back to bring something into my life I could never imagine. He then broke the silence. "I'm here to ask you for something," he said, his voice firm but emotionless. I stared at him, my mind racing, trying to understand what he wanted, trying to prepare myself for what he was about to say. "I want us to have an open relationship," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I froze. His words were like a punch to my stomach. I couldn't quite understand what he was saying. Open relationship? What was that? He wanted to share his life with me, yes, but with another person? I didn't know what to do, how to react. The pain of the betrayal was still fresh within me, and now he wanted me to share what was mine with another woman? I stared at him, trying to understand, trying to see if he was joking, if he was being sarcastic, but he didn't seem like it. He seemed serious, completely serious, as if this were a legitimate proposal. "I like her," he continued, as if explaining something simple, something I should accept. "I don't want to lose you, but I also don't want to give her up." And that's when something inside me broke. I felt as if I were being crushed, as if my life had become an object he could manipulate and divide as he wished. I didn't know if I was more sad, more furious, or more confused. I wanted to scream, I wanted to cry, but something stopped me. Something inside me told me to stay calm, to think, not to make hasty decisions. But how could I think of something so absurd? How could I accept a proposal like that? I felt like I was being pushed into a situation that made no sense. I didn't know if he was being honest or if he was just trying to justify what he had already done. I felt ridiculous. How could someone you loved so much do this to you? How could he come back after abandoning me and ask me to accept this? I was being placed before an insane dilemma. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know if I should stay or leave. Anger took over me, but at the same time, a deep sadness consumed me. He had returned to ask me for this, and I found myself without answers, without action. And then I asked myself, what would I do now? I was completely lost. I didn't know how to handle what was happening. He had crossed a line, but I didn't know if I was capable of abandoning everything I knew, everything I had lived up until then. I only knew I was at the edge of an abyss. The pain of being replaced, of being disrespected in such a way, was consuming me. But at the same time, I knew I couldn't make a decision without first understanding who I was now. I wasn't the woman he married. That much was clear. But who was I now? What did I really want for myself? I found myself there, lost, in a whirlwind of emotions I couldn't control. I was in a state of total confusion. Every time he looked at me, I felt like I no longer knew who he was or who I was beside him. He had asked me for something so incomprehensible, something that seemed so out of my reality, and yet I found myself trying to process the idea. How could I accept it? How could I share something so intimate, something so precious, with another person? But the pain of losing everything I knew was consuming me as well. I didn't want to give up the life I had built by his side, but at the same time, the proposal he made to me was so deeply humiliating that I didn't know how to look at him the same way anymore. The trust, that pillar on which everything had been built, had been destroyed, and now I found myself lost, not knowing what was left of us. I spent days thinking, days without being able to sleep properly, replaying every memory, every conversation, trying to understand what was happening. The memories of our best moments together, those that used to warm me, now seemed to mock me. I kept asking myself if he had already been thinking about leaving before he even left, if he had already decided it wouldn't be possible to stay with me. Every gesture of mine now seemed so insignificant in light of what he had done. I found myself lost in the mirror, trying to recognize myself. Where was the strong woman I thought I was? Where was the wife who trusted her husband completely? Instead, I found a woman broken, trying to hold on to a love that was unraveling before my eyes. What should I do? I knew I couldn't live a lie. I couldn't accept what he was proposing. But how would I do that? How could I just let him go? The pain of giving up everything I had built with him, all the dreams we shared, seemed unbearable. I still felt something for him, something I couldn't simply erase. How is it possible that the man who loved me, or at least seemed to love me, was asking me to accept something so destructive? I knew the decision wouldn't be easy. I was lost between the conflicting feelings that consumed me. I loved the man he had been, but now he seemed unrecognizable. He was asking me to share what was ours, to accept the pain of seeing another person enter our lives. The pain it caused me was indescribable. I tried to rationalize the situation. I tried to look at him objectively, trying to find a reason, a justification for what he was doing. But nothing made sense. I knew he was no longer the person I had known, that he had transformed into something I no longer understood. And somehow, the pain of losing my trust, my security, of what I thought was a life built together, was greater than the pain of saying goodbye to him. It was more painful, more bitter. I found myself facing a huge dilemma. I knew I had to choose between preserving my dignity and peace of mind or trying to save what was left of us. The idea of giving in to what he was asking me destroyed me, but the idea of letting him go, without him, also destroyed me. What would I do? I looked at him, trying to find some trace of the person I had loved, but I couldn't see anything. He was there, asking for something I never imagined I would have to hear. And deep down, I knew that no matter what happened, nothing would be the same. I would never be the same. No decision I made would make things go back to how they were before. He had broken something inside me, and I knew that wound wouldn't heal easily. In the end, I knew the choice would be mine. I didn't know which path to take, but I knew it would be a path with no return. There was no more room for illusions, no more room for empty promises. And I asked myself, is it worth trying to save something that was already destroyed? Could I ever trust again in someone who made me go through something so painful? But at the same time, something inside me said that it wouldn't be easy to leave everything behind. Time seemed to stretch, each day dragging on like the one before it, yet nothing felt certain. Every moment that passed seemed to weigh heavier than the last. The silence between us had become suffocating, and yet, despite all that had happened, I found myself unable to make a decision. I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth, couldn't tell him how deeply hurt I was, how broken I felt. For days, I walked around in a fog, my emotions tangled in a mess of confusion and disbelief. How could this have happened? How could the man I loved, the one I once saw a future with, do this to me? Everything I thought I knew about him had been shattered, and I wasn't sure where to go from here. The pain of betrayal still lingered, sitting like a constant weight on my chest, but there was something else too. The guilt of not knowing what to do next. Was I being too harsh? Was I not being understanding enough? He'd been open about his feelings, about wanting to keep me in his life, but was I wrong for feeling like this was too much to ask? The truth was, I didn't even recognize myself anymore. I had become someone I didn't know, someone who questioned everything. I couldn't understand how I got here, in this moment, stuck in a place where neither option felt right. I had spent so much time wondering if I could forgive him, if I could ever look at him the same way again. The idea of losing him was unbearable, but so was the idea of accepting the terms he was offering. I had always thought of myself as someone who would fight for love, someone who would always try to find a way to work things out, but now I was standing on the edge of something that felt impossible. And the scariest part was that I didn't know what I was supposed to be fighting for. Was it for the man I once knew, or for the man standing in front of me, offering me a reality I could barely fathom? There was no easy way out, no simple answer to any of the questions swirling in my mind. I felt torn between the life I had always imagined and the life that was being forced upon me. The person I had been in that life no longer seemed to exist, and the future I had once envisioned now felt like a cruel illusion. The more I thought about it, the more I felt trapped in my own emotions, unable to move forward, unable to go back. I had tried to convince myself that I could live with it, that I could accept his proposition, that somehow we could make it work, but deep down I knew it wasn't possible. There were some things that just couldn't be undone. The trust had been broken, and no amount of time or conversation could fix that. I had given him so much, trusted him so completely, and now I was being asked to share that trust with someone else. Could I do that? Could I open myself to the possibility of a future where he was with someone else too? The mere thought of it made my heart ache, and yet I knew I had to face the reality. Either I accepted this new version of our relationship, or I let go. There was no middle ground, no compromise that could make it all okay again. As each day passed, I became more aware of the fact that this was the moment I had to make a choice. There was no avoiding it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything would eventually go back to normal. It wasn't going to happen. The damage had been done. The love we once shared, the connection we had been twisted into something unrecognizable. And as much as I wanted to hold on, I knew that I was no longer the same person who had walked into this relationship. I had changed, and so had he. The question now was whether we could ever find a way back to each other, or if it was time to let go and face the pain of moving on. Every part of me wanted to scream, to fight for what we had, but there was also a part of me that knew it was time to stop fighting for something that was already broken. I wasn't sure if it was courage or fear that was keeping me from making a decision, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living in this state of limbo. It was draining me, wearing me down, and I needed clarity. But clarity didn't come easily. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how impossible it was to know what the right choice was. How could I choose between holding on to something that might never be the same again and letting go of the man I once thought I would grow old with? It was a question that haunted me, kept me awake at night, made me question every aspect of my life. And in those moments of doubt, I could only ask myself, what would I be willing to lose? What would I have to sacrifice in order to move forward? Could I find peace in the unknown? Or would I forever be stuck in the past, haunted by what could have been? It felt like I was standing at the edge of an abyss, unable to make the final leap, yet knowing that if I didn't move, I'd fall into something far worse. The pain of letting go was suffocating, but the idea of staying in this limbo, pretending that everything could return to normal, felt just as unbearable. I found myself thinking back to the beginning of our relationship, to the moments when everything was so simple and pure. Those memories of laughter, of shared dreams, of love that felt like it could conquer anything, now seemed like a distant, unreachable fantasy. How had it come to this? How had I gone from being the woman who thought I could rely on him forever to being someone who didn't even recognize herself when she looked in the mirror? The change had been gradual, but undeniable. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the realization that what we had was no longer real. It had been replaced by something cold and distant, something that no longer had the warmth of the love we had once shared. And in that moment, I knew that I couldn't stay in that place anymore. I couldn't keep waiting for things to get better because they wouldn't. He had already made his decision, and now it was time for me to make mine. But as I stood there, the weight of that decision pressed down on me like a stone, too heavy to bear. I wasn't ready to say goodbye. I wasn't ready to let go of the man I had loved for so long. But I also wasn't ready to stay in a relationship that had become a lie. I had to let go, no matter how much it hurt. I had to walk away from the love that I thought would last forever, even if it tore me apart to do so. The hardest part wasn't saying goodbye, though. The hardest part was accepting that we couldn't go back. We couldn't undo the damage that had been done. I couldn't turn back the clock and find that love again. I couldn't erase the hurt, the betrayal, the broken promises. No matter how much I wanted to, no matter how much I wished I could go back to a time when everything felt right, I knew that wasn't possible. And with that realization came a strange sense of peace. It was painful, yes, but it was also necessary. I had to let go to move forward, to heal, and to find myself again. And even though it felt like my heart was being ripped out of my chest, I knew that I couldn't stay in this painful cycle forever. I had to break free, even if it meant facing the unknown. And now, as I stand here, ready to close this chapter of my life, I'm left with the question, what comes next? The future is uncertain, and I don't know what it holds, but I know that I have to keep moving forward. I have to keep going, even when it feels like the weight of everything will crush me. I have to find the strength to heal, to rebuild, and to rediscover who I am outside of this broken relationship. And as I take that first step toward healing, I ask you, have you ever been in a place where you had to let go, even when it felt impossible? Have you ever faced the pain of losing someone you loved, of saying goodbye to something you thought would last forever? I want to hear your story. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words can be a lifeline to someone else going through something similar. And if you feel moved by this story, if it resonates with you in any way, please subscribe. Let's keep these stories alive. Let's keep sharing our pain, our experiences, and our strength. These stories need to be heard. And if you want to hear more stories of pain, loss, and resilience, check out the playlist linked in the description or in the pinned comments. We're all in this together, and sometimes the only way to heal is to listen to each other. Thank you for being here, for being part of this journey with me.